Let's go live now to the Employment Minister, Stuart Robert. Mr. Robert, thanks very much for your time. The Prime Minister praising the New South Wales government for sticking to this plan. He says they're honouring the deal that National Cabinet did with the Australian people. Is New South Wales the gold standard once again?
It's certainly a strong light and a strong example, not only opening up their economy at 70%, Kieran, but I'm calling you from home quarantine on the Gold Coast, and they're also on Saturday opening up the northern part of New South Wales so that there's greater freedom there, and of course therefore going back to that original hotspot definition that the National Cabinet had in place. So I'm looking forward to the Queensland government also honouring that and allowing the northern New South Wales flow of citizens into Queensland as well.
The Prime Minister says he wants the premiers to hold their nerve when in the tunnel and there are hospital stresses and so on. But if the advice from the health officials is you've got to put more restrictions in place, it's no good holding your nerve, is it? They've got to listen to the experts, surely.
We all take advice as government ministers and heads of state, Kieran, and international experience is also a guide for us. But again, the national plan is there to give guidance. The Doherty model is there, which is the basis upon which the national plan is put together. And that lets us know where we can go from 70 to 80%. It gives certainty for business and the economy. And it, of course, allows our health systems to plan, all of which they've been doing for the last 12 months.
You've seen another case in Queensland, this time a baby and a separated family. The baby has been obviously struggling with health issues. The Premier showed some contrition today. Is there a recognition from the Queensland government and the health officials that they're getting this wrong in terms of the balance between compassion and public health?
Keeping your own citizens locked out of your own state is wrong, full stop. Full stop. Every Queenslander has the right to come home. And the idea that many Queenslanders have been locked out arbitrarily. Remember, Kieran, when the Premier put in place the restriction, it was like 2 hours notice. In 2 hours' time, if you're outside of the state, you're not coming back in. And there were all sorts of people locked out in their potential thousands. Queenslanders need to be able to come home, whether they're babies, children, or otherwise. You've got a right to go to your own home, Kieran. You've got a right to return home. That's what the Premier has to focus on.
Is there an imbalance, though, between the focus on COVID on the one hand and the rest of the health question, whether it be mental health or the family reunions that we're talking about here, the compassion side?
You've got to create a balance right across it. Otherwise, you'll have people not going into hospital because of lumps in their breast or seeking vaccinations for cervical cancer or a range of other preventable diseases. And we don't want people not presenting into their GPs or into hospital situations because of concerns for their health. We also don't want to see an anguish of mental health continue. It's why it's important to get people home. It's why National Cabinet agreed to a trial that South Australia is leading in home quarantine. WA is now following, so is New South Wales. Would be great for the Premier of Queensland to lean into home quarantine so Queenslanders can come home and they wouldn't be separated. There's a lot of different ways we can solve these problems, but locking people out of your own state, out of their own home, that is not an answer.
Now, my colleague Andrew Clennell reported this afternoon the health advice, the New South Wales health advice provided to the crisis cabinet and urging caution in terms of this reopening. Does the federal government accept that this could be bumpy, the road to reopen?
I think we've seen in the last 18 months with COVID, there's been a lot of bumps along the road. And Delta variant, of course, has thrown up a whole new range of bumps. Again, we go back to the national plan, Kieran, that says what happens at 70%. We're seeing the New South Wales Premier honouring that and saying to their citizens the Monday following 70%, this is what will happen. And then we'll move to 80%. We're seeing the moves now in home quarantine. Of course, at 80%, we'll start allowing vaccinated Australians to travel. So there'll be bumps in the road. There always are. COVID is throwing up all sorts of crazy things to us. But if we just give confidence and hope to the Australian people by following the national plan we agreed to, I'm pretty confident we'll all get there.
And Stuart Robert, if we look at the Pfizer question, that vaccine acquisition, the health minister's in the spotlight again. He was written to his department, received correspondence from Pfizer last year. Within weeks, the UK, US had forward orders in place. Not until November were we talking about orders of Pfizer. Has this exposed a damaging delay, which has meant we are where we are right now in these lockdowns?
No, not at all. And I note the Health Minister's comments and the Prime Minister at midday. Conversations were started with a whole range of vaccine manufacturers very, very early in the piece. Indeed, an organisation, SciTag, I think it was a scientific and industry technically advisor group, was put together to actually deal with these organisations. Enormous conversations and connections were occurring. And of course, you saw Pfizer's January statements in terms of the doses that came forward, and even Pfizer making the point that they'd come forward at the first available time. So no, we don't accept that. The Health Minister was leaning into this very heavily at the start, as indeed was a whole range of areas of government, including SciTag.
So the government wasn't penny pinching here, was it?
$291 billion worth of COVID supports into the Australian economy. Kieran, the greatest fiscal uplift into a nation's people in the history of our country. I think penny pinching is the last thing you can say about what the Morrison government has lent in to supporting Australia, its people and its interests right now.
Employment Minister Stuart Robert, thanks for joining us from the Gold Coast.
Great to talk to you, Kieran.